Interested in the future of military technology, tactics, techniques, procedures, and these vital lessons that are coming out of the battlefield in Ukraine as applicable to military organization around the world. I'm Patrick Tucker, Technology and Science Editor at Defense One. Please take your seats. Very happy to have you. And joining me today for this discussion, Lessons from the Ukrainian Battlefield, please help me welcome my panelists. We have Retired General Richard Shirreff, Nico Lange, and Samira Braund. Please, everybody, come on up.
Good morning.
Okay, thank you so much for joining me. Again, vital discussion. When we look at the future of warfare, that future is being written right now on the battlefield of Ukraine. Very briefly, I'd like to go around the horn, have everyone give a brief introduction to yourself, what you do, why you know anything about this. Starting with you, Richard Shirreff.
Richard Shirreff, I was 37 years a soldier, and my last post was Deputy Supreme Allied Commander Europe. During my soldiering career, I was a tank commander. I commanded an all-arms battle group, an armored brigade, a division, and operationally fought in the first Gulf War as a tank company commander, and then in other areas as well. So in a sense, I guess I took part in the last tank battle of the 20th century.
Right, and tank battles are back, man. We're all about tank battles these days. Nico, please go ahead.
I'm not sure if we are all about tank battles, but we can talk about this. I worked in defense, but I also worked and lived for a long time in Russia and Ukraine. Mm-hmm. And I got frustrated by German, but not only German generals who were basically sitting behind a desk all of their life. Mm-hmm. And then started telling the Ukrainians should do this, the Ukrainians must do that, the Ukrainians must understand this and that and something else, while it's the Ukrainians that are fighting the war since 8 years now. And there's a lot we can learn from them, and there are a lot of elements of war fighting where the Ukrainians are doing things better, more creatively, more pragmatically than we, and I think we should learn from them, and there are a lot of lessons. And there is a report by GLOBSEC, How to Beat Russia, that is based on interviews with commanders and soldiers in the field in Ukraine about those lessons.
Yes, Nico is the author of this report, along with a couple others. I highly recommend it. Very illuminating take from, again, actual anecdotes, interviews from the battlefield itself. Vital to understand this. Samira, tell us a little bit about yourself.
So I come from a different background to these prestigious gentlemen here. So I head up the UK Defence Solutions Centre, a unique organisation which is funded by the UK Ministry of Defence and match funded by the largest defence primes in the UK. And really our role is to provide evidence-based analysis to inform decision makers. We are the bridge between government and industry, and they use our organisation to shape the discussion and bring industry into the tent early.
Okay, and that's, I think, also a really important aspect of this that needs to get touched on all of the time. We have an international arms industry that is playing a huge role right now in Ukraine, and there are a lot of questions about whether that role could be bigger, how it can be better, a lot of new players, a lot of established players, a lot of policy that's involved. But when, I've said before, when I talk to defense contractors now, when they try to sell me on some cool thing that I'm supposed to write about, my question is, do you have anybody in Ukraine? Are you working with the Ukrainians? Are you drawing lessons from that conflict? And are you applying them to what you're building, what you're making, what your concepts of operation are around research and development? And if they say no, then I'm sort of like, is there anybody behind you? That's the guy I want to talk to. I don't know what to tell you. So with that, I think that between the two of you, your experience, this is really kind of shows how you're seeing this mixture of old capabilities, things that for a long time we were told were not going to be relevant to the 21st century's conflict based on an understanding of Middle East operations, things like long-range fires, big armor, playing this really vital role in Ukraine, howitzers. But I was not told that howitzers were going to be relevant to a 21st century conflict, but they're incredibly relevant. At the same time, you see, as you know, your expertise speaks to, new capabilities, satellite technology, drones, consumer off-the-shelf, dual-use technologies playing a role. Richard, how do you square your understanding of that, and how do you apply some of those lessons about innovative use of new consumer technologies on the battlefield to established militaries that are still trying to reorient themselves to great state conflict methods of war that, in many ways, they're not as practiced on as they were a couple decades ago?
I'd lay out my cards on the table here and say that I have never gone with the flow about the irrelevance of the combined arms equipment, the traditional combined arms equipment that is still in legacy service: tanks, armored infantry fighting vehicles, self-propelled artillery, armored engineers, and all the rest of it. Because the nature of war, the reality of war has been that there was an inevitability about the return of industrial state-on-state warfare. We were not going to become a bunch of rat catchers chasing insurgents for the rest of our lives. And so it has proved. But what we're seeing now is an extraordinary combination, and it's no surprise at all, where what you might call the traditional combined arms capabilities are key. Because at the end of the day, if you are to retake ground, the only way you do it is by forcing the enemy to withdraw, surrender, or you kill him or her. And the only way you do that is to put your people into their trenches. And the only way you get them there is in protected mobility, and you move forward with a massive suppression of enemy defenses and fires. But to do all that, and what we're seeing, and I completely agree with Nico's initial point here, that this is not just about tanks. No, of course it's not. It's about combined arms capabilities. But combined arms capabilities which in a sense are themselves software platforms enabled by data and artillery, all of which has been supported by drones in profusion. And I frankly, I think Nico's report bears really close study because it's superb, and he's absolutely right that NATO armies have so much to learn from the Ukrainians, because I think they are so far ahead of the game. And I'd be very surprised, and I don't know because I'm not serving, I'd be very surprised if the lessons that the Ukrainians are learning, putting into place, implementing, which are so well captured in Nico's report, have been really synthesized and brought into service in Western armies and NATO armies.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. I think that right now we're having a discussion about whether or not Ukraine can and should join NATO, and in 10 years, Ukraine will be leading centers of excellence out of NATO centers. So, Nico, to your report, talk a little bit about that, because to this problem of suppressing a major force, when we talk about industrial state-on-state warfare, we tend to think of them as sort of two evenly matched groups, but there's a lot more Russians. They had a lot more equipment going into this. We're now feeding stuff to the Ukrainians as quickly as we can, and I think you can look at the kind of slow drip of things, and that's not quickly enough. But to your report, how do they do this? How did they actually create kind of an asymmetric advantage against a much larger force using things that we were giving them, things that they had on their own, and achieve this sort of overmatch with a relatively small force so quickly?
Well, first of all, if we talk about war, which is maybe not for Richard, but I think for the rest of us, it's new. And if you see the media discussions we have about this war, it's still imprinted by conceptions of the Napoleonic Wars, where you have two forces meeting out there in the battlefield, or by entrenched warfare of the First World War, or by tank battles of the Second World War. And all of that is not what is happening in Ukraine. It is something different. It is new in many elements. And I think the Ukrainians are very good in creating a better situational awareness by using all data sources that are available to them, from the mobile phone of your babushka that is on the street and photographing the Russian columns or the Russian soldiers, to commercial satellite images, drone feeds, and military intelligence and other intelligence information, and the capability of making sense of that data, fusing the information not only for superior situational awareness, but also for identifying targets, target acquisition, prioritization of targets, and engaging targets, I think that is new. It is a very fast kill chain, and that is something I think we can learn a lot from.
Yeah.
And it's not the equipment that we gave the Ukrainians that is winning, and the technical parameters. It's the Ukrainians. It's the people.
Yeah.
And the second element that comes, I think, together with this better situational awareness is mobility and precision. So being able to use the artillery pieces that were supplied by different partners, from 777 to Caesar, Panzerhaubitze 2000, Krab, and even with longer ranges with HIMARS, integrate this into a system of systems. Having an app on your tablet, doing all the calculations that are necessary, having a very high quota of engaging targets and actually hitting them. I think that is showing glimpses of the future of warfare. And that's why it's so important to take the lessons in, because I mean, Germany is a specific example, but still I think quite typical, because there was not enough finances available. There is a tendency in armed forces to invest in capabilities that they thought they needed 10 years ago or 15 years ago. But I think we have to look into Ukraine to invest now into the capabilities that we need in 5 years from now or 10 years from now.
Yeah.
And maybe on the tanks, we will see how this plays out now in the offense, because we have seen a lot of strengths of Ukraine with the decentralized way of warfighting, with the superior mobility and precision in a defense operation. We will see how this plays out in offense and how they can combine arms, which is not tanks, engineers, artillery, infantry fighting vehicles, and air force, which might be swarms of drones, and the mass use of commercial drones combined with tanks. And I think also we will see maybe a role of infantry fighting vehicles that are maybe even more important than tanks when it comes to moving fast, enveloping the enemy, pushing into the positions, like you mentioned.
Yeah.
So it's old and new combined, and it's a very specific combination of low tech and high tech.
Yeah, yeah. Well, to that, when you look at, to this point, investing 5-10 years from now, based on the lesson that you're learning right now, and we talked a minute ago about connectivity, the connectivity of data to the operator, the connectivity between weapon systems, enabling highly dispersed, much more nimble small teams in Ukraine. Where does industry come in on this in terms of creating that sort of connectivity, both in weapon systems, but also just ubiquitously across society? Because as we pointed out, it's also like kids on the ground with cell phones that are contributing to the open source intelligence environment in Ukraine. So how do you ensure that?
So I want to pick up on your point earlier around people, their budgets. So this war has seen the eastern flank budgets go up, their national spend by 6%. It's quite a significant, but it picks up on your point that they're purchasing equipment that they think they need yesterday, not for tomorrow.
Right.
Some of the work that we're doing very closely with the Ministry of Defence, the UK has taken this war extremely seriously. So we have set a run of industry days where we're bringing our large defence industry and SMEs, because innovation is at the SME level and actually is at a cross-sector level, which I'll come back to in a moment. And we are having those discussions with the frontline commands and really understanding is what is the challenge. So we're having real-time learning on what's happening on the battlefield that's coming back into London. Those conversations are happening and understanding what the challenges are. And we've got industry in the room having those discussions with the military. So it's not, we want this tank, we want this missile. It's what's your challenge? Because what your challenge is will determine what the technology is or what the platform or what the equipment is. So it's just looking at it in a different way.
What are the challenges that they're highlighting?
So multi-domain integration is significant. None of us have got it right yet. I think the Ukrainians are probably closest. The blended forces is the way forward. It's the work that we're doing at understanding from a technology perspective, but it's still hard precision military capability that makes the effect. And picking on discussions that Richard and I have had about pushing back forces on the ground. So it's having that blended mix around autonomous systems and how you use autonomous systems effectively.
Okay, yeah, and now autonomy is a really interesting point here because I was always told by defense contractors, hey, we really need to upgrade the level of autonomy in everything that we're creating because we're going to be dealing in a comms contested environment. And I wonder, is that something that you're picking up here? Because to a certain extent, it's a comms contested environment. The Russian forces are very good at electronic warfare. We know that they're able to sometimes use targeting based on Starlink to actually attack Ukrainian forces, and they can pick up cell signals and things like that, and their targeting is very good. But at the same time, you also see connectivity everywhere. You see a wide mix of different forms of comms, both linking together satellite data that's commercial, but also bringing together more esoteric, clandestine forms of communication too. So speak to that a little bit. How do you see connectivity playing a new role in future warfare in an environment that is sort of comms contested, but where comms is still ubiquitous and needs to be ubiquitous in order to enable fast maneuver for operations?
Well, I think arguably warfare has always been about comms and connectivity. If you're Napoleon at Austerlitz, you've still got to command and control, you've got to get your orders, and you've got to communicate, and you've got to be connected. It's just the way you do it. And of course, what we're seeing now is comms and connectivity ramped up and on steroids in a way which we've never seen in the past. And as Nico has articulated so clearly, this bringing together of iPhones and tablets and Starlink and stuff that's off the shelf, integrating it in a way which has not been done before, is fundamental. And we need to be learning the lessons from this. And I look at the pretty sclerotic procurement cycles, certainly I'm delighted to hear what Samira says about the industry, and that's great. But I think we've got to find ways in the West, in NATO armies, of bringing in equipment much more quickly and being able to harness the genius that's out there in a way which we've not done before. Now, there are clearly security concerns. There are issues about making it soldier-proof and battlefield-ready and the like.
Right.
But the Ukrainians have demonstrated speed over accuracy, speed over security, because in speed and agility, you're building your own security in. And I'd just like to pick up one point here. In Kyiv a month ago, with the GLOBSEC field trip, we visited a newly established tech hub called Brave One.
Yes, yeah.
And I cannot highlight how inspiring it was to see this group of, frankly, pretty young people, led by a young woman with two young children, both the same age as my grandchildren. And what Brave One does, it's funded by the Ukrainian MOD, but it brings together inventors operating out of their workshops and garages, innovators. It brings together investors, the ministries of digital transformation, economy, and defense. It brings in the general staff. And when I said, how long do you reckon it's going to take you to, what's your aim in terms of getting stuff into service from idea inception to battlefield, she said, I think we're pushing it 2 months.
Yeah.
Well, go and tell that to the British MOD. They're years, light years away. And that agility and speed and harnessing of capability is something that NATO absolutely has got to do.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a really good point because, we so far we've talked about lessons from Ukraine in terms of concepts of operation and fast maneuverability and the importance of NCOs and even battlefield innovation. But now, as we get into year 2, the lessons are actually about rapid procurement, integrating innovators, operators, and command in one cell, which is something that, to your point, the British MOD, I can't imagine the Pentagon being able to do something like that. Oh my gosh, program of record in no. Oh no, sir, it'll take a decade. So Nico, what do you think of this? Is this something that larger Western militaries can actually follow? Or is this up to basically the Ukrainians to pioneer because they have to, but great big militaries, they have a particular way of doing things. They have particular comfort zones, and you're never going to break through that bureaucracy. What do you think?
No, I think we have no choice. I mean, the reality will get us. And it's one thing to present each other PowerPoint presentations about drone warfare in the year 2040 and what capabilities we might get if we are investing now. And the other thing is to look into Ukraine and say that and see that drones are everywhere.
Yeah.
This will not go away. And the economy of using, for example, drones in warfighting is changing very quickly. So we are talking about masses and masses of cheap drones, and we have to come up with solutions of our own now. We have to manufacture them ourselves and not buy them from China. We have to train our forces in all branches to use drones ubiquitously like the Ukrainians are doing it. This is happening now. And if we are talking about long-term solutions, it will not provide the security we need. Therefore, I think there is real pressure in doing things very fast. And the question of this innovation we see in Ukraine, I think, is also that we see glimpses of maybe new solutions to old military problems. And they might not be solved by just incrementally, slowly moving on with the same platforms that we had for many years and then improving them step by step. There might be completely new solutions to military problems that are also cheaper. And I mean, we cannot, everybody understands that we cannot shoot down masses of drones that are very cheap with multi-million dollar expensive
Patriot missiles per drone is a bad trade-off.
It will not work that way. So we have to find cheaper solutions. But also, in terms of doctrine and training, there are many lessons. This is not only technological. The Ukrainians have shown that with situational awareness, precision and mobility, they were able to turn, at least to some extent, shaping operations that in our understanding would be operations to prepare a big mechanized push. They turned shaping operations into the operation.
Yeah.
That's how they freed the southwest bank of the Dnipro River. That's how they freed north of Kyiv. And Russia was forced to withdraw, and Ukraine found, out of necessity, but still a cheap way to beat Russia and to make Russia withdraw. I think we have to look into those solutions and to draw conclusions for procurement and innovation, but for doctrine and structure and training of the armed forces at the same time. I think that is key. And I see in many armed forces the idea, we will procure new equipment, but we keep the structure and the doctrine more or less as it was. And I think it has a lot of consequences also for the very way we are organizing the armed forces and how we are training.
Okay, I want to take that question to you, Samira.
Can I pick up a point after?
Sure.
There's a strategic imperative here. We don't have time. Let's be clear. Ukraine, let's hope they do. Let's hope that they will be able, with one counteroffensive, to achieve their military objectives. But we shouldn't assume that. And the so what there is that we should expect a series to achieve their military objectives. I think we probably need to expect to see a series of major counteroffensive over a period of maybe a couple of years. If they fail to achieve their military objectives, we in NATO need to be prepared for the worst case. And the worst case means we might have to intervene. And that means we've now got to be learning those lessons, implementing them, and ensuring that our forces are battle ready. And that starts today. It's not 5 years, it's not 10 years, it's now. And so we've got to wake up and smell the coffee and recognize that a fundamental mindset shift is needed across the NATO alliance. And we need to put ourselves effectively, psychologically at least, and economically and industrially, onto a war footing to prepare for the worst case. That's point number one.
Okay.
Second point is, don't assume the Russians aren't looking at the Ukrainians and thinking, yeah, they're clever. Ukraine is full of very, very clever software designers, but so is Russia. Russia, and as a legacy of the Soviet mathematics syllabus, Russia has plenty of software designers, many of whom have been doing a lot of work for Western companies as well. So they'll be looking at the way the Ukrainians are operating. And we might scoff at the Russians for deploying T-55 battle tanks from the 1950s. But who's to say the Russians aren't linking them all up with some sort of software capabilities to give them additional punch, additional reach, et cetera, et cetera. So don't assume that the Russians aren't learning the same lessons from the Ukrainians and are implementing them. And we need to factor that into our
That's by the way, the main argument against our incremental approach and all this boiling the frog ideas, because it gives Russia time to breathe and to figure those things out. We should not give them the time.
We've got to get on with it. Sorry for interrupting.
No, it's okay. It's okay. So I want to turn to you to exactly that point about Brave One. When you talk to industry and you present them perhaps with this entire paradigm shift, hey, do you think you could get to deployable prototype in 3 months? When they talk about the obstacles to that exist in government, that exist in logistics, that exist anywhere else, what's the main thing that they bring up?
Regulation. It's difficult. We're not there yet, and we have got a lot to learn. But this is about alliances, not just NATO, EU, Europe, GEF. We need to look at maybe a harmonised technology strategy to build in that interoperability piece. There's another piece here around resilience, and so from my perspective, and this is my view, is that we are, as a European Union, is that we're trying to increase our capability. And we need to stop buying off the shelf from America and really strengthen our own capability. So actually there's a real opportunity here for partnering, nation-to-nation partnering, multilateral relationships around strengths of what each nation can bring. So there's another piece that we need to talk about around MRHO and logistics and supply. We have got nations along the eastern flank who've got really strong capabilities in this area, and we need to work collaboratively together. But it needs to be interoperable, and we need to have the doctrine and training. There was a discussion yesterday around